P. Diddy is about to be slammed with more than 100 new civil lawsuits as a wave of accusers come forward with even more shocking allegations. And according to the attorney bringing the lawsuits, these hundreds of accusations include child sexual assault, in one case on a child as young as 9. But Diddy isn't the only one implicated. In fact, high-profile celebrity names are expected to be revealed in these new lawsuits, and that could lead to even more charges. To understand all this, we'll sit down with former federal prosecutor Gene Rossi to break down everything we know so far. I'm Sierra Gillespie, and this is Law and Crime News. If 12 civil lawsuits and 3 federal charges weren't enough, Sean P. Diddy Combs is now up against more than 100 new shocking accusations in his alleged sex trafficking scheme that spanned multiple decades. Diddy's fall from grace started nearly 1 year ago in November 2023, when his ex-girlfriend, Cassandra Ventura, filed a bombshell civil lawsuit against him. Cassie's lawsuit laid out some major claims against the once beloved music icon, saying that over the course of their years-long relationship, Diddy physically, verbally, and sexually assaulted Cassie. And she didn't shy away from any of the details either. She gave specific examples of Diddy's alleged abuse, like when he forced her to carry illegal firearms or have sex with prostitutes. And Cassie's lawsuit also introduced us to the now infamous term freak-off. She says it started when Mr. Combs hired a man and brought the man to his home in Los Angeles. The man, Mr. Combs, and Miss Ventura wore masquerade masks and ingested drugs. Mr. Combs directed Miss Ventura to perform sexual acts with this man while Mr. Combs watched them. He allegedly masturbated while he directed Miss Ventura and the man to do specific sexual acts. Mr. Combs began to call the arrangement a freak-off, or FO. He would repeatedly tell Miss Ventura at random moments that he wanted an FO, and Miss Ventura was eventually expected to facilitate the location and the hiring of male sex workers. These same allegations were made over multiple other civil lawsuits, including the one filed by Rodney Jones, who's also known as the producer Lil Rod. His lawsuit was filed back in February and also specifically mentions freak-offs. Lil Rod alleges he saw a similar pattern to what Cassie described, saying he was sexually assaulted by Diddy, forced to consume drugs, and even have sex with a prostitute. This same lawsuit alleges there are hundreds of hours of video and audio recordings of Diddy and others participating in this illegal activity. We now know that when federal authorities raided Diddy's homes back in March, they were collecting some of that electronic evidence, and now it's being used in the case against him. The federal indictment against Diddy mentions this evidence and also defines freak-offs, saying they were elaborate and produced sex performances that Combs arranged, directed, masturbated during, and often electronically recorded. Okay, I know you're multitasking when you're watching our videos, and if you're out running errands, listen up. I have to tell you about the free app Upside that gets you cash back on daily essentials. It's something I use every time I pump gas because it's easy and it's free, so why not? All you have to do is get the Upside app and then claim an offer for whatever you're buying. You pay as usual and then just follow the steps on the app to get paid. To find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on the screen and use our promo code LCNews to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. But allegedly, Diddy wasn't the only one involved in this illegal activity. The federal indictment confirms what Lil Rod said. Diddy's associates would assist in the planning and execution of these freak-offs. These associates facilitated the freak-offs by, among other things, booking hotel rooms for the freak-offs, stocking the hotel rooms in advance with the required freak-off supplies, including controlled substances, baby oil, lubricant, extra linens, and lighting, cleaning the hotel rooms after the freak-offs to try to mitigate room damage, arranging for travel for victims, commercial sex workers, and Combs to and from freak-offs, resupplying Combs with requested supplies, delivering large sums of cash to Combs to pay the commercial sex workers, and scheduling the delivery of IV fluids. During the federal raids, investigators collected some freak-off items, including more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lube. Prosecutors used all this evidence and more to move forward with Diddy's charges of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Diddy's pleaded not guilty to these charges and says his side of the story will come out at trial. All the while, Diddy is behind bars at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, having been denied bail twice. And while Diddy is literally in a holding pattern, the case against him continues to build, with a wave of new civil lawsuits soon headed his way. This week, Houston-based attorney Tony Buzbee announced 120 civil lawsuits against Diddy will be filed in the next 30 days. If that number is staggering, consider this one, the number of people that initially reported the sexual abuse. Buzbee says it's thousands. Now, the lawsuits haven't been filed yet, so we're still unclear about specific information like dates or names. Here's what we do know. Buzbee says the assaults took place in Los Angeles, Miami, and New York, dating as far back as 1991. 60 of the plaintiffs are women and the other 60 are men, and of them, 25 alleged they were sexually assaulted as minors, the youngest of which was only 9 years old when the sexual assault occurred. Others were only 14 or 15. Over the dozens of lawsuits, plaintiffs will describe new allegations against Diddy, including violent sexual assault or rape, sexual abuse, facilitating sex with controlled substances, false imprisonment, compelling prostitution, sexual misconduct, dissemination of video recordings, and sexual abuse of minors. And then there's the other people involved. Diddy's associates could be named in these coming lawsuits, but so too could be some high-profile names. Buzbee says he can't tell us the names specifically, but that they are high-profile and will shock us. In an interview just this week, Buzbee told me some of the allegations in these new civil lawsuits could mean even more charges are filed.
What I'm hoping is, and I'm encouraging my clients, to those that, to the extent that they are willing to do so, to make themselves available to the federal authorities, to tell their story, and I expect the indictment will grow. I expect there will be more counts.
If the federal indictment does in fact grow, how would that even work? Could any of these soon-to-be revealed high-profile names be listed as co-defendants? Here's where we turn to former federal prosecutor Gene Rossi for some more insight. So, just starting talking about these more than 100 new civil lawsuits that are about to be filed against P. Diddy, what's your initial take just hearing that number, 120 new lawsuits?
Well, the number that really shocked me is there were 3,000 people that contacted this team of lawyers, and they pared it down to only 120. So they probably have other victims that they could use if they have to, but 120 is just enormous. And that shows to me, and these are allegations, they have to be proven both criminally and civilly. It shows to me that for the last 20 years, allegedly, Diddy has been engaging in quite a massive enterprise that violates federal criminal laws and state laws.
And since this news of these 120 lawsuits, you said 3,000 people had come forward. I actually spoke to the attorney who's planning to file, and he said thousands more came forward after this. So do you think it's possible this is just the start of civil suits against P. Diddy?
Well, it reminds me of the quarterback, Deshaun Watson. I think he's now the quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. But Deshaun Watson only had about 20 to 25 accusers. When you get into three digits, 120, probably 150 at the end of the day, that's just enormous. And two things happen. Number one, his legal fees are going to be incredibly high. He'll have to get a team of 25 lawyers to handle all these lawsuits. But the key word is distraction. Sierra, he's facing a federal indictment, propounded by one of the top U.S. attorney's offices in the country, the Southern District of New York. They're the varsity. They're geniuses. And they don't indict somebody because it's a slow day in the grand jury. So he has that big monster federal indictment. And now he's going to have approximately 120 civil suits. I don't know how he's going to survive financially, if not emotionally.
That leads into my next question about the prosecution against Diddy, because he's now been indicted on 3 federal charges, as you said, super severe. But what are prosecutors thinking as they're hearing about these new lawsuits? Do you think they're going to investigate them and maybe add charges?
If I'm a prosecutor, number one, they may add charges. They don't have to, but they may add charges. But more important, when I'm a prosecutor and I was one for a long time, and there's a civil suit going on, it's a two-edged sword. That civil suit could give you more evidence, could give you more victims, could give you more information, but it also could jeopardize the credibility of potential witnesses in your criminal trial because they'll be deposed, they'll be questioned, and they will be subject to civil discovery. So there's that tension. I had a criminal case against a pain doctor, and there was a civil lawsuit, a wrongful death suit. It was an overdose, and that civil lawsuit actually very much helped my criminal case, because the defendant in my criminal case made some statements in the civil case that were not helpful to him in my case. So it can help the prosecutors, but it can hurt the credibility of witnesses. It's a high wire act.
I mean, it's just an overwhelming number of people who say they were victimized by P. Diddy. There are more than 1,000 now at this point, at least according to the attorney who's bringing these suits. But what's interesting is that in the federal indictment, there's only one victim that's listed as victim one. Why do you think that is, that federal prosecutors only included that one victim rather than the hundreds of others?
What the prosecutors did is they filed or presented to the grand jury this indictment with one victim, just to get something filed so he would be arrested and detained and jailed. I will be shocked if the prosecutors in the Southern District of New York do not supersede, amend, if you will, and add additional charges and additional victims. I would be shocked if they do not do that. So the first indictment is just a taste of what's to come.
What will that look like as federal prosecutors are potentially going to add, as you said, future charges, future victims? What's going on behind the scenes right now? Are they interviewing other people? Are they coming together and deciding what charges would be appropriate? What would that look like?
They are interviewing other people. They may be conducting grand jury testimony, if they're looking at additional charges. They can't use the grand jury to build a case against the charges that are returned and approved already, but they can look at other charges, and that's what they're doing right now. And as I said in one of my earlier appearances with you, they're probably working 24/7, working Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays. And for those prosecutors in the Southern District, this case will be consuming their life for at least the next 2 years.
And you know what was interesting to me when I read the indictment is that there was no mention of any child sexual abuse. This is something we heard rumblings of for many years, that Diddy had allegedly sexually assaulted people who were minors. And now, with these new 120 lawsuits, there are some pretty stark accusations that he sexually assaulted kids as young as 9, 14 years old. Is that something that federal prosecutors might take a look at?
Oh, absolutely. Well, there's nothing that inflames the passions of a jury than the exploitation of someone who's underage. And if you have a victim who's 9 years old, 11, 12, 13, 14, in their early teens, that is incredibly powerful for a prosecutor to present to a jury. And as I understand it, these 120 potential lawsuits, the ages range from a high of 38 to as low as age 9. And I also understand that about two-thirds are African American, a third are white. Um, uh, we have women and men. So you have the full panoply. But here's what else is important. According to the articles, the attorneys who are representing the civil victims, civil suits, they're going to list as defendants not just Diddy, but other people. And according to the attorneys, some of those other people, those other co-defendants, they may be names that will be easily recognizable by the general public.
You just brought up the next part that I wanted to talk about, that we're not sure who these names are as of yet, but some people have said they're even more popular than P. Diddy or even more A-list, that we're going to be shocked by these names. Again, let's not speculate on who it could be. We could see this soon, hopefully. But what does that mean for those people, celebrities who right now are thinking, okay, yeah, I was at a Diddy party back in the day. I did participate. What's going on for them?
I can tell you this, those people you're talking about that may be co-defendants of Diddy, they know who they are, and they are not getting sleep right now. And they're probably getting attorneys because they're going to face a civil suit and possibly a criminal. And you could see the prosecutors in the Southern District, based on information in the civil suits, maybe adding a couple of co-defendants in the federal indictment. Now, if they do that, it kind of raises legal issues, motions for severance, things like that. It could delay trials. So they may keep it just against Diddy because it'll be simple and straightforward, sort of like what Jack Smith did against Mr. Trump. He had one defendant, Mr. Trump, in the January 6th case to keep it simple. Prosecutors may do that and just have it against Diddy, but they may add co-defendants. But those civil suits, they're going to have co-defendants for sure.
Now, it does seem to me that prosecutors want to nail Diddy, so to speak. I mean, he's the kingpin behind all of this, and he's the one who has been indicted as of now. So if these other names could be added as co-defendants, we'll see. But I'm wondering if potentially they would speak with prosecutors or investigators and flip and testify for the prosecution rather than become a co-defendant, potentially.
When I was a prosecutor, I always referred to the pancake theory. You try to get people to cooperate and flip them like pancakes so you can use them in your case. So if the prosecutors are going to keep this case simple and just against Diddy, those other people who may be culpable, as I say, I will try to flip them like a pancake and I'll offer them some options. One is immunity, and prosecutors don't generally like to give immunity. Two is say, listen, we're not going to add you to this case. We may charge you separately. So why don't you pay now as opposed to paying later and cooperate, plead guilty, and hope for leniency at your sentencing? That's probably what could happen.
Taking a look again at these new civil suits, again, they haven't been filed yet, so we don't know for sure the entire details of them. We'll have to wait and see. But something that we have heard is it kind of shows the pattern that we've heard since the start with Diddy, that he would drug these people, then sexually assault them, oftentimes record it. So this has been documented throughout these civil suits at least a dozen times now, moving toward 120 times. Do you think this will be helpful for the prosecution to establish that he had some sort of pattern with all of this?
Oh, absolutely. Because they have charged basically a RICO in the federal case. And any crime that he committed that's part of that enterprise, that RICO, that will be admissible at trial. And here's the other thing. Those victims, whether it's 3,000 or 120, they may have text messages, emails, recordings, voicemail messages, videos that may help the government, and they will readily turn that over.
Again, it's just overwhelming the number of accusers, now lawsuits. Diddy is in trouble, to say the least. But what kind of defense do you think he could bring? He's been very outspoken through his attorney that we're going to fight this. Diddy says he's going to testify. But how could they combat all of these witness testimony and the evidence? I mean, is that even possible?
Anything's possible. And of course, he's assumed, presumed innocent. Their allegations. But here's the nub. When you have a case like this, the only defense that is viable, if there is one, is you have to attack the credibility of the victims and say they consented, they were all in, they weren't coerced, and it sounds horrible what happened in terms of these freak offs, but it was a mutual understanding and that there was no exploitation, no crime, although it was sordid and lascivious, as they say. But that would be the key defense, is that they were all in and they consented. But will a jury believe that? We shall see.
They're recounting this really difficult time in their life. Obviously, it's been very traumatizing. And now they're going to have the defense attorney saying, did it really happen? Didn't you consent? I mean, isn't that tough for the witnesses?
It's tough for the witnesses, but I forgot to mention this. For the underage victims, it's hard to say that a 9-year-old consented to any of this if it happened, or somebody who's 14. That's why we have statutory laws for juveniles and all that. So for the victims who are underage, the consent argument is just impossible to make. So those are really hard. But for the older people over 18 and older, their argument could be that they their argument is they were coerced. His argument is it's consensual. So regardless of the defense or what the victim says, it's going to be a mess. But those witnesses will be very powerful for the government under the RICO statute.
We're still super early on. Diddy wasn't even indicted a month ago, so still in the early stages. But do you have any sort of guess on a timeline, what things could look like?
Sierra, I don't think there will be a trial in federal court in New York until probably 2026. It's definitely not occurring this year. It highly unlikely next year. The prosecutors will be lucky if the trial is in 2026.
Following the news of these 120 new civil lawsuits, Diddy's team released a new statement saying, quote, as Mr. Combs' legal team has emphasized, he cannot address every meritless allegation in what has become a reckless media circus. That said, Mr. Combs emphatically and categorically denies as false and defamatory any claim that he sexually abused anyone, including minors. Diddy has pleaded not guilty to the federal charges against him and is due back in court on October 9th. For Law and Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.